I get it. This isn't something sexy that you put your budget to, right? People are always talking, we're going to develop the next building, next building. Well, you know what? You also got to prevent and protect the community you have, because if you don't, you won't be able to afford it when it comes and you're not prepared.
Welcome to the Political Maverick, the podcast that keeps you informed, engaged, and entertained on all things current events. Let's dive in. Welcome everyone to the next episode of the Political Maverick podcast. On today's episode, we have a great friend, partner in all that we do, but coming down from San Diego. Let me introduce you to Fred Sotelo, entrepreneur, leader, community activist, entrepreneur, father. I mean, there's so many titles to this gentleman, but a good friend to mine. Fred is from the Urban Leadership Development Institute, born and raised in San Diego, with a breadth of information, knowledge, but on the community-based segment. Want to talk to you, Fred, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jaime. It's awesome to be on, and congratulations to having the show and launching it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I want to give you congratulations, too. Earlier today, we drove down to San Diego, the 45th annual MLK Breakfast Award Center, put together by the local YMCA in San Diego, one of the largest in the country. You were honored with community activists, and that's what I want to talk to you about, Fred, is let's go back. And this episode is basically about crisis management, emergency response. You were honored because of the January 2024 flooding down in San Diego, a catastrophe in itself, flooding in different regions of San Diego of 6 feet of water being flooded, infrastructure breaking down. But more importantly was the post. What happened to local, state, and federal reactions, progressions on getting people who are left without a home, next steps, dealing with insurance, and a variety of different things. We're seeing that right now in Los Angeles with the fires in Los Angeles. But tell us more about, let's go back to January 2024. Give us a little summary of what happened and where we are now.
Just imagine sunny San Diego, right? This is the city that we look at beaches and the weather, and all of a sudden, January 22nd, 2024, there were parts of our community with a long stretch throughout the city and especially in the arteries, in the most densely populated and some of the most vulnerable communities in San Diego. We had water as high as 6 feet high running through communities. So just imagine that 6 feet will cover your door. And we had folks literally on their roofs being rescued by fire and rescue and PD and volunteers. And this was almost like, a movie couldn't have, depicted this any much more realistic. I mean, this was something out of a Hollywood movie. You just didn't imagine San Diego to ever be flooded, especially with that kind of water, right? 6 feet. So, the response to that was really tough because, very few, if any, cities are ready to have where 911's nonstop, right? And not only do you have arteries of the city, you can't get there because the water is there. So it's even if you want to help people, vehicle can't get through, right? You literally needed a boat to get to a lot of people. I mean, go figure. So that all happened in a short time period. It was record rainfall. There was a lot of different things, a lot of pressure.
And this within just a few days, right? Oh, wow.
In a few hours. And so you have a compound, have a system that's probably 100 years old, the system that we have in San Diego, the creeks, Choyas Creek, etc. You compound with, different agencies that creeks go through. You have all this rain coming at this, record rainfall, so you had all these situations happening at one time. So at the end of the day, FEMA actually took in over 9,000 applications of people that were impacted from this flood. Of those, FEMA determined over 2,500 homes were damaged with the water. That's a lot of homes. 2,500 homes is a lot, especially in an urban corridor where we already have a housing crisis. So that day was, like I said, it was unique. I don't think anyone could have imagined it. So what happens? So at the time, I'm a part, I've been on the board of the Jackie Robinson YMCA for many years. And at the time, chairman of the board of the YMCA of San Diego County Board of Governors. And the intentionality with that location is not just the gym, but to serve the community.
Right.
So instantly, just on being authentic to the community, YMCA opened up its doors. Initially, people want to come dry off, use the showers. But within no time at all, I mean, we had hundreds and hundreds of people coming in and not even understanding how to serve them. Our home is underwater, 6 feet, right? There is no going back right now, and it was receding. And then the second issue that was really tough, when this all happened, was there was another rain going to come in 3 or 4 days, right? So it wasn't like you had this disaster. So that YMCA became ground zero for volunteers, for the flood survivors, for anyone wanting to help them. So you had two things happening. And the challenge was the data, right? You're trying to figure out, who's what's wrong, what's their situation, triage the situation. And I think the lesson learned was, is it's all about being prepared, cities, local governments, counties, etc. And I think the biggest issue that we found was that, during this time period, folks weren't ready for it. All the way from, you have this water, the utility has to cut the power, right? You have water, you have all these things happening at the same time. Everyone's reacting across the city, right? I mean, we had animals that were electrocuted. Think about that. Not only did you lose your house, your animal got electrocuted, right? Cars, you lost your ID, you lost everything.
And I'm assuming, Fred, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, that you're homeless. You don't know where to start or how it's going to start. You're still paying mortgage if you own your home, possibly rent if you're renting, and don't have a roof over your head, unless the good people, nonprofits like the YMCA and others around the community. And where do you go next?
And that was a challenge. You had almost 1,200 people homeless overnight, instantly, right? So if you think about that when LA is going through similar, right? I think there's similarities. One's fire, one's water, but at the end of the day, it was destruction of homes that you weren't able to go back to, right? So if you look at it from a bird's eye picture, you're looking from the sky. First of all, it's Maslow's theory, right? Hierarchies of needs, right? So shelter, right? Well, how do we get folks into shelter, right? That's the first thing. Number two is the big issue is what is their needs? Just think, if you're a senior citizen, which we had a lot of seniors in that community, you lost your medicine, whether it's blood pressure, your diabetes, your measurement tools.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And your elevated stress at the same time. You don't know where you're going to go. So then how do you get the money on the ground that night to reserve that many hotels overnight, right? Or wherever you're going to put people.
And this is San Diego, where it's a destination point for traveling tourism, which has more availability in hotels and in other means just to take the insurgence of more visitors as opposed to another location. So even that was not enough.
Yeah, we had over 60 hotels within the 2 weeks with people going into. So we had people as far as Southern Riverside and LA County, and we had to send people, right? Because remember, we also have tourists coming in. So, hotels are in and out. So you had that. They have to eat, right? You and I know that to go out to just a fast food joint for 3 people, you're going to spend $50, right?
Yeah, and that's California. I mean, the price of everything is...
Yeah, so you got, how do you feed these folks, right? Then a lot of them lost their vehicles. They're totally destroyed. So they have no cars to go to work, right? So there were just so many layers of needs, right? So I think, the lessons we learned is how do you not only prepare, but how do you respond, right? And so you look at the community-based organizations, the volunteers, city, county, state, and federal. How do they communicate to meet the needs? Because they all have different resources, right?
And did they all come together happily and make this thing good and nice?
The biggest challenge is no, because they have different, what we call government speak, right?
Right.
Government speak changes according to what government it is,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
But one government may have an idea, it's different in the speak of another agency, right? So that was one issue, is getting people on the same page and then really index their resources to triage the problems, right? Food, shelter, medical, right? So that was one issue. And then I think what we did learn is you really need oversight, right? Oversight in the sense that who is going to coach through this situation? By the time we got philanthropy to the ground, it was already 3-4 days, right? So these folks were just straggling. Second, I think with that oversight is you really have to have a data plan immediately, because you have a short window of people that if they're not at their house, where are they, right? The homes are destroyed. So what is that data intake like, and to be able to communicate with the folks? And I think that was where the big breakdown was.
And with it's going to be almost a year next week since the floods. Who, looking back, it's easy, after, as I said, the quarterback, Monday sitting down and figuring out what, putting the finger where things are at. Where do you think the breakdown was within local government? Was there a crisis communications plan where detailed, who's in a leadership role here, there, getting, corporate America in with the insurance companies and construction and things of that nature? Was there a plan?
No. And I think that's the issue is I think we prepare for a lot of things, but that kind of devastation in a short time with that many people, that very few people are prepared for that, or agencies or governments, right? Especially if something's never happened. Right. We never had this in my lifetime. I couldn't even imagine it. Right. We prepared for earthquakes and, different things, but not a flood of that magnitude. So I think first was, how do you get government agencies to commit leads and leaders, right, that have competency in disaster? How many governments even have an expert within their own internal structure on disasters, right? Because if you send someone that does accounting and now you're going to deal with the disaster, is that going to work?
Exactly. I mean, you being from the outside of local, state, and federal government, did you see what leadership there was on the city county side versus the state and federal? Was it just like, I hate using the word shit show. Basic, was that what it was?
It was. The challenge is who was going to take responsibility for what, right? That's the challenge. It's a political thing. Who takes what responsibility? Because there's so many pieces of it, right? If it's health, if it's housing folks, if it's the infrastructure that failed, if it was responding, they all have different agencies, right? So that's the challenge. Who's going to own what? And second of all, who has the resources to fulfill the need? And you and I know when it comes to money, it's easy to point fingers in a lot of directions. We've seen them going this way, that way, because when all of a sudden you ask about who's going to sustain this or support it, all of a sudden it's crickets, right? Or
every direction, but to themselves.
Exactly. And I get it. There's, a lot of folks don't have this in their budget. And I think that's something cities and counties and government, they need to have this in their budget, because it's no longer a matter of if we're going to have more, crisis, whether it's emergency, fire, earthquake, flooding, whatever it may be. It's just a matter of when, right? We just seen this in LA, and you never thought would happen in LA. So do we have a kitty just for this response mechanism, right? Do we have a leadership model in place that could interact interagency, right? And I think that's the challenge. The lessons learned is the challenge, county, city, state, to be able to, what is your plan for whatever it happens? Communications, that's a key. If no one's on the same page and they're saying different stories and you're the victim or you're the of whatever happened, there comes a point where you become tone deaf because everyone's talking to you with different speak. And you're also going to tone people out because you're not going to believe them after a while, right?
Right.
And that was a big issue.
Yeah. And after, I can see that we see that happening in even within the same level of government, from one agency to the next, a variety of different governments speak and no one really communicating with one another. Almost a year past, has a plan for the future been done for crisis communications? Has the city or the county kind of, well, look, this is what happened the past year. These are the recommendations, maybe a commissioner or board put together. And this is what we're going to implement and educate the community and ourselves?
Well, there's been some efforts, but the challenge is they brought an outsider that weren't part of it to give recommendations, right? Okay. The ones that knew it was us folks in the community that collected the data, served the families, had the touch point with the families, had the understanding of the need. And here was the biggest nightmares. All that data we collected as nonprofits, right? We had a QR code. We were communicating. Because of privacy laws, our data, they did not take it. We couldn't transfer it, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then the federal, you have FEMA, right? That is a piece of, once it's, comes in, and that data can't be shared with an agency. So you have all these folks asking for data for whatever, and they don't share it because of privacy issues, right?
Which makes sense. There's a protection of people, but at the same time, that's a streamlined process.
But how do you know who their need is, right? And as you're going, different people are being served. And I think here's where it really, really gets sticky. And I think with governments, counties, and cities is not only the data you're sharing, right, and you're doing is what does the procurement of your contractors look like, right? Because you're going to have a lot of contractors. Most cities and counties and states don't have the bandwidth to deal with something like that.
Right.
So do they already have emergency response contractors that could do feeding, that could do medical? Medical we found was huge.
And when you mean medical, like mobile clinics,
yeah, we needed people, healthcare workers, right? Personal healthcare workers to go out there, to go to the hotels where they were, because, we're in the new years of insurance. Everything needs an approval. I lost everything. While you need to get approval for your insurance to say yes to the pharmacy to give you a reissuance of your medicine.
Right.
Go figure. But I haven't took it for 3 days. While you still need an approval from your medical to approve it to pick it up from the pharmacy. So these little nuances were so many layers to those folks that were impacted. And I think what we really found during this is also folks put money on the ground, but it didn't have a plan. You can't just put money on the ground and not have a strong plan. And, that's how are you going to steward money during a crisis and resources?
Nice.
And I think that's the question that cities, counties, states have to ask themselves. Yes, if you do have resources, how are you going to be a good steward that it's the most impactful?
And how are we seeing the electeds in San Diego now dealing with that? Have they become good stewards? Is there still road bumps that the community is dealing, and those victims that have flooded homes, have they been able to reconstruct, build options that they may have?
No, and that's been a big problem because, first of all, the way we run most politics now are district, right? So you're going to fight for your district. Board of Supervisors traditionally has five, and they're different districts, right? So where does it fall? And so we found a lot of discourse in this. Here's one discourse we found in the government. It became political and it made no sense. When we had the wildfires here back in 2007, those folks went to the stadium for one day, but most of them found hotels or whatever because they had fire insurance, right? Most all houses in California, fires covering them, right? So they could insurance, get a hold of them, go to the hotel, we'll pay it, we'll start doing what we do. Well, the problem is most homes in San Diego didn't have flood insurance. And those same people that had fire insurance in 2007, they didn't have flood insurance, right? The flood insurance, and this is something, it's a policy thing, most of the time only cover for something that is caused in your house. So a line breaks, it damages your floor in your house, that's considered a flood. Anything externally is not considered a flood.
So Mother Nature doesn't count?
It doesn't count. Acts of God doesn't count. It has to be your pipe in your house busted and flooded, then we'll fix. That was a huge issue with these folks, that they literally had no coverage. So they had insurance. They were good, homeowners pay their insurance,
right.
but
they were underinsured or had the wrong insurance.
Underinsured wasn't even, that was beyond the story, right? Underinsured. And so there, you have to ask yourself, within, the insurance and the way, the framework of insurance, LA fires, we're hearing the stories now, folks got discontinued before the fires. And
right. I mean, California is dealing, as you know, with, for the past few years, just insurance issues. We had one of the largest carriers, State Farm, deciding not to renew homeowners insurances throughout the state of California. It was just too expensive. With all the fires we had in Northern California, floodings, it was just too cost prohibitive to be able to bring in new clients.
And that's the challenge is okay, what happens economically, right? Insurance is, you're not insured there, but you've been paying insurance. So if you're the homeowner, I thought I was covered. No, your flood insurance isn't this kind of flood, right? Then number two, so you got to know there. Then FEMA comes in, and FEMA, they were great people, nice people, did everything, but they're limited to how much they give.
Right.
And FEMA basically gets it back to safe. So those homes, they weren't going to rebuild them, but they were going to be able to muck them out, get the mold out. And basically the max was, I think, 44,000. I don't have the exact number, but it was in the 40s, right?
Yeah.
That was the max. So out of those 9,000 people, I mean, it was less than 100 that got the max.
Wow.
Right. And if this home, imagine your house has 6 feet of water, the drywall, the flooring, the electrical's gone, your plumbing, go figure, that's at least $150,000 to $200,000 to repair, depending on if you have a slab. So even the FEMA money, if it came in max, wasn't even a drop in the bucket for you. And if you didn't have insurance, it was layers of problems.
I would never think of that. I mean, I would assume you would say flood coverage, earthquake coverage, all those things. It's exactly what it says is what it means. So now talking about each level of government has its own talk. Insurance has its own talk as well.
It
Has
does.
anything been done to help to protect the insurance carrier or future insurance carriers of someone explaining to them what exactly they're buying and if it's going to cover their
I mean, I don't even think we're at that advocacy point right now. We're still on just trying to get people back in their homes
even
and
after a
shelter.
year?
After a year,
Uh,
and here's what so our group is comprised of 8 organizations that came together and said, everything from, helping young youth to do this, healthcare. So none of them were emergency organizations, the why, but
they're just leadership in the community.
with leadership, there's a need. Let's figure it out, right? And I think, we've kept on since the beginning wanting to have an advocacy plan, but we're still on reactionary. This family, I mean, we still have families 1 year later that weren't on the radar that maybe had a foot of water. And they said, oh, well, we squeegeed it out. We got it out. And they didn't understand, a year later, it's all mold and you can't even live in that house now, right? And so, we didn't even index all the homes properly, right? A heat map on that. Not us, but government. I think government part of the role. So now they're coming out of the woodwork and they got in zero programs, right? And then you have the folks that it's $300,000 to fix their place and they might have got $25,000. That's barely enough to clean the place out, right? So now you have all these homes in a community that aren't functional, right? And then you have a housing crisis. As a housing, you're saying we only have so much housing in inventory. And we have a homeless problem. We have all these other problems, but now you have all these people displaced. So where are they going to go?
Right.
That has been our big challenge. There was nowhere to put them. One of the schools I mentioned, today in the presentation at the awards was one of the schools in the immediate community is down 25% attendance because those kids no longer live there. Right? They couldn't go back. And even the schools, you look at what toll it took on the families and the children.
So now you have a domino effect, Fred, because if 25% of those students are going to schools, let's say in majority public schools, then those public schools aren't getting 25% of the revenue to be able to educate everyone in that school as
Average
well.
daily attendance is gone. 25% is a lot of money. That means you're going to have to cut teachers, et cetera. So,
Absolutely.
like I said, it's a ripple. It's all the way from seniors to children to families. And the stress. Can you imagine your parents, the stress? They don't know. I mean, we have families living on the side of their house in trailers still. We have people couch surfing. And so here's another caution. If you're a city, county, state, and you say, okay, well, we're going to put people in hotels, right? That's expensive. Even at $150 a night, go figure putting 1,000 people up, what that is a day, $150,000 a day.
Up.
So 1 week or 10 days, you spent $1.5 million, right? But it didn't answer the problem is you have to repair the homes for them to go to, Then we had the catch-22. If you got FEMA money, and here's something governor agencies got to take notice. You could not receive that money if you're getting money from another agency, like the county, right? They're double dipping, they call it. So now you have a lot of nuances in how money works that can support people, right? And for instance, the maximum, I think, was $4,500 that FEMA would give 2 months of support for rental assistant, right? Well, the challenge was in San Diego, by the time you put a deposit, your average rent's $3,000, a deposit of $3,000, and that's $9,000, and your maximum support you got was $4,200 or $4,500.
That financial gap, where's someone gonna get it when you're working paycheck to paycheck?
And you can't even move to another place, right? So, and then there's no inventory unless you move far from the city. And so, I think there's so many nuances that they're baffling. So going back to today, as what I've learned of 1 year, we've had community meetings every single week. That I think has been great because it's not only part of getting information out, but it's also part of healing for those families that need it, right? They have somewhere to go, someone that cares about them. And I think the transition, what we learned is once the community understood, there's no one here to save us but ourselves, right? You had folks, there was issues of theft, right? As contractors were putting stuff in there to repair, people were all of a sudden it was walking off job sites.
Right.
So, and we've seen community do, neighborhood watch, et cetera. But then you had all these other things, right? Of predatory. There was a lot of predatory folks coming in there saying, I'll give you $50,000 for this house right now.
Right. Flip it and make,
generational. Yeah. Generational. They know they can never build it. Well, I better take the 50 than to have nothing.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm still paying whatever. So you had a lot of predatory stuff happen immediately. You had, that's where counties and cities, do they have vetted contractors ready to go? Because folks, if you're struggling, your house is flooded, burnt, earthquake, whatever, someone has a truck, they look like they can help you. We need X amount of money.
Right, upfront.
Folks did that. They gave them their credit card, come find out these people just took off. So those are things to look out. So that's the California CSLB contracting board. So I think if we're looking at disasters, what is the repair? How do we vet out so that there's not scams or people being took advantage of? So, because at the end of the day, governments are not just to serve, but also to protect.
Absolutely.
And how do we have those protection mechanisms in place? That's a lesson learned.
Well, Fred, I'm going on lessons learned a year after the floodings in January of last year in San Diego. We're seeing catastrophe hit again in California with the fires. And we know that's going to be a lot more devastation, a lot more impact to the community economically, psychologically. And we're already seeing problems in regards to, engagement within the community, response to the community, crisis communications, next steps. What do you think are some of the lessons learned that other communities need to see and prepare prior to something maybe happening in their own communities?
I think first is be prepared to have oversight, right? Who will that be? Do you create a czar? Who's your point person, right? And then, it's like anything, who are community organizations that we go to, who are foundations, because you're going to need money. Who are those foundations, corporations? And I think you have to ask those questions now way before the disaster, right? You have that list. You're just like...
It's part of the preparation. Absolutely.
Yeah, what I tell folks, you live in your home, you should have water, Band-Aids, whatever it may be, right? Well, do counties have their safety kit ready to go? And I think that's on a policy side, I would really push cities, counties to say, do you have your kit ready to go? Your list, your go-to utility. Who are all the folks you're going to bring together?
Right.
Where will you meet at? What were those meetings? Because we had issues in just approving disaster centers that were in jurisdictions to say yes, that everyone could use it as a disaster center. Because folks are coming needing clothes, food, etc.
Yeah.
At one point we had to just get sandbags out.
Right. I mean, from setting up a plan of action in these crises, but there needs to be some practice prior to that. I mean, year round, where the community understands what the government gibberish and talk is. People know where to go. What does, the signs of like green, yellow, and red, if you need to evacuate, you evacuate now. Is San Diego beginning to go that route yet?
I think so. I mean, this was a lesson for everyone. We had the fires, and the fires, created an awareness. And it was different communities, right? You got to look about those impacted. It makes a big difference in what community is impacted in terms of resources. And, I'm not going to go down that path right now, but there's some truth to that, right? More affluent communities to less affluent to, moderate, low income, there's a different pool of how people react in terms of government. It's the way it works. But I believe it's important that you have to treat all equally, and often the ones that are overlooked, that's your workforce. So this isn't just helping people. What are you going to do when folks aren't showing up to work? Right. That keep the hotels going, keep the city working, doing the services that are
the
critical.
Economy. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And I think you have to look at emergency disasters and response from a big lens. It's not just, we got to place people where to live and this and that. No, it's looking at workforce, looking at education, because when any piece of it's disturbed, and you mentioned it earlier, it has a trickle-down effect. Everything's going to get disturbed. And we've seen that here in San Diego, where it disturbed the workforce, it disturbed education, it disturbed families. We've had, as a result of this, we've had people, deaths that, are indirectly linked to the stress, et cetera, right? So there's so many layers, and I get it. This isn't something sexy that you put your budget to, right? People are always talking, we're going to develop the next building. Well, you know what? You also got to prevent and protect the community you have, because if you don't, you won't be able to afford it when it comes and you're not prepared.
Absolutely. With that, Brother Fred, I want to appreciate you making the time to join us on the Political Maverick podcast. I think you gave us great insight to what's happened within the year, the flooding of back in January 2024 in San Diego. We're seeing the devastation in Los Angeles, seeing what happens from there. But I think at the end of the day, communities need to come together, not in situations of devastation and flight, but when things are good. Be able to communicate, to be able to talk, to understand who your elected officials are, to understand, the resources around you. And it takes a village. I think, and I appreciate the work that you've done, the leadership that you did. We witnessed, you being recognized and your team out there in San Diego for the past almost, 52 weeks out there, week in and week out. That type of leadership, that resilience to be able to help your community is what's needed. And all of us need that in every community we live in. So Fred, thank you so much for being who you are, taking that leadership role. Continue doing that, and I know that you will. And thank you for joining our show.
Thank you. I appreciate you greatly. And like I said, and most importantly, those people that are victims of any disaster, my heart goes out to you. And as a society, we got to be more prepared in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And to the victims out there in San Diego, to the ones we currently have in Los Angeles, our prayers, thoughts, and everything in between go out to you. Thank you for joining us this episode with Fred Sotelo, leader, entrepreneur, business owner, but, a heart of gold to be able to help his fellow community, San Diegans, in their time of need. Thank you again. Thank you for joining the Political Maverick podcast. Until next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Political Maverick. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X for updates. Catch every episode on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. See you next time.